Okay guys, good morning. So today is Wednesday, May 20th. It is our last video lesson of the year. So good job for getting here. Keep up all the hard work. So after this week, we're going to go ahead and wrap up all of our official assignments specifically towards our curriculum for this year. Next week, we're going to have a few fun assignments to kind of wrap up our year right before summer break. And then we'll be ready to come back in school for the fall. Okay, so let's go ahead and wrap up today's lesson with our events and details, build, reflect, write activity that are following the two stories that we read yesterday. We continue our descent, our nonfiction text from Journey to the Center of the Earth, the excerpt that we read, and our fiction text, Jules Verne, Master of Science Fiction. This activity specifically references only our nonfiction text. We continue our descent, which is the excerpt from Journey to the Center of the Earth by Jules Verne. So I'm going to go ahead and our story tells us, I'm going to read the directions. After reading, we continue our descent. Identify what you think are three most important events in the story. So, and then we're going to talk about our hypothesis, which is what we think happens after the excerpt ends. So, okay, so I'm going to go ahead and flip over to our page. And we're going to go ahead and talk about what we feel are the three most key events and details. I say details more or less because there wasn't very many key events because the excerpt was so short. We only really got some details that led to our key details of the story, of the portion of the story that we read. So when we're looking back at our notes that we made yesterday, so if I flip open to the first two pages, so I'm on 12 and 13, I'm looking at it. One of the key details that I'm going to mention is the modern day flashlight. I feel like that's a very big key detail for the story because it ties in the scientific technology that was around in that period when the story was written. And it also really illuminates what they're seeing as they're entering in the volcanic cone, right? They wouldn't be able to see anything without their modern day flashlight. So for our key events, for our first key detail, I'm going to go ahead and put a box around details because we're really focusing on the key details of the story because of the excerpt because the excerpt is so short. There wasn't a lot of key events that happened, but there's a lot of key details that were introduced. So I'm going to say, I'm going to write what page our detail is on. So our detail is going to be on page 13. This symbol right here means paragraph, okay? So this symbol right here. And then I'm going to write equals paragraph. Okay, so then I'm going to write page 13, comma, paragraph 2. That's where our detail came from. So this is important for us to know when I'm looking back at this activity. I can see that our first key detail was found on page 13, paragraph 2. So I'm going to write, I'm sliding this back and forth, sorry guys. So I'm going to write the key detail. I'm not going to do it in complete sentences because this is kind of like a summary of what the key detail is referencing. So I'm going to say the Ruhmkorff, I think that's how you say it, coil apparatus being introduced in the story. Okay, so this is our first key detail that we're going to be discussing is when the room coil apparatus being introduced in the story, and I'm going to underline this because this is kind of like our key detail. And next to it, I'm going to write in parentheses, modern day flashlight. End parentheses. So this is our first key detail that we're going to include in our activity. And again, guys, our build, reflect, write activities are found in our close reading stories booklets on page, this one specifically on page 21. We're only doing this part of the chart. However, if you are using the digital files, the digital versions of the stories, you can always write this down by yourself in your notes or follow along. I suggest writing this down in your notes only because this is going to benefit you for learning this sort of, again, taking key events, pulling apart stories, annotating, breaking it apart, which is kind of our main focus, right? So it's only benefiting you by practicing writing and completing these charts, even though I'm not collecting them or you're not turning them in. It's still important for us to be able to kind of break apart these texts, right? Okay, so let's flip to the next page when we have to go to number 2. Okay. I don't really see anything to where this one talks about this page 14 and 15. There's 2 photographs on the page, so there's not really full page of text. So it's kind of talking, remember this page is talking about when they first enter in the volcanic cone for the first time, and we underlined key event or detail question mark because we didn't really know if we're going to use this in our chart. So I'm going to go ahead and pass on this right now just because I feel like there's more key details later on in the excerpt that we feel are more important. So I'm going to go ahead and flip the page. Okay, so if we're on this page on 16 or 17, we're looking, they're talking about, this one's really talking about how the decrease and increase in heat temperature, and when they sat down and took a break from on their journey when they were about 2 hours in. And then when they talk about how their water reserve was already half exhausted and how they were talking about how they were surprised that they hadn't seen any spring water. So I'm going to go ahead and use this as a key event. So again, a key detail. Again, we need to write down where we got it. So I'm going to say page 17. I'm going to use the paragraph symbol again, just to save room. I'm going to write paragraph symbol, and it is paragraph 17. Oh, that's funny. It's paragraph 17 on page 17. Paragraph 17. So I'm going to do a bullet point. Our key event is going to be our key detail, water reserve. I'm going to write water reserve. Already half gone. 2 hours in, which meaning 2 hours into the journey, right? So I'm going to underline water reserve because this is the kind of key point to the detail, like when we underlined the Ruhmkorff coil apparatus. I'm underlining water reserve because this is kind of like the key point of the of our key detail. And then I can look at, and then they were asking about why they haven't come across any water yet. And I kind of like how they included this aspect at the end, right? Where not only was the characters asking this question to each other, they were also kind of asking the reader, right? And they left at the end of the paragraph. That was the end of the paragraph. It kind of was up to the kind of led up to the assumptions of the reader of why do you think they hadn't come across any water yet, right? So, okay, moving on to the next section. Our last point of this activity. I'm going to go ahead and flip the page over to our last 2 pages. Okay, and this was kind of a key event in the story. This was kind of I feel like our only very big key event in this excerpt. Because the excerpt of the story was so small, it was kind of really hard to determine the key events of the story because this is only a portion of the story. So we had a lot of key details, which is why I put that box around details. But this is kind of where I feel is a key event, right? So I'm going to put where we found it. So I'm going to say page 19, paragraph symbol, paragraph 36. Okay, this page is talking about more of the scientific elements of why they wouldn't have found water, being that they were still in that kind of realm of the lava being present. And then they talk about how the temperature of the earth is increasing or decreasing and how it should be way warmer than it actually is, and that's just from theories, right? Because no one has gone this far in the earth, according to Jules Verne in this story in history. So it's talking about how no one has gone this far. So in theory, since they are so far into the earth and they are in a volcanic cone, they would have assumed that the earth's temperature would be much higher than it actually is. But for this key event specifically, I'm going to do a bullet point, and they said 6,000 feet deeper, 6,000 feet deeper down into the earth than anyone before. I'm going to put anyone in bold, in caps. Than anyone, and underline it, before. So they're talking about how they are 6,000, according to their calculations, they are 6,000 feet deeper into the earth than anyone in history, than anyone before. They're the first people to get this far. So this is kind of a key event, I feel, because it's really talking about a key victory that they have encountered on this journey. So that's kind of our 3 key events and details for this activity, but it talks about a hypothesis. I'm not going to write this down. This is more of a discussion element. It says, okay, then hypothesize what happens after the excerpt ends. So obviously we don't have a copy of the whole story in front of us, so we can't really go where this chapter ends and figure out where we left off. So the last thing that the story tells us is the temperature, which should have written 81, was in this place only 15. This was a matter of serious consideration. And that's where it ended. So it's really up to the reader to kind of hypothesize where we think or what we think is going to happen next. So if we're looking at all of these key details from the story or from the excerpt, I keep saying story, but I mean excerpt, sorry. These key details from the excerpt that we have discovered, we can see how they first discovered the flashlight when they used that, then the detail about the flashlight, the detail about the water reserve, and then how they were 6,000 feet deeper into the earth than anyone before. So us as the reader now has to hypothesize what we believe to be the next steps in the story. When looking at this specifically, I mean, for me, I would guess that in some way or some form they find a source of water, that they run into like a huge waterfall, and it's more water than they could ever use, but they're able to find a place to live, and maybe inside the earth, there's like this hidden jungle or something, I don't know, something that made it way more creative than we could have ever anticipated or ever questioned, right? Something they were saying how no one's ever gone this far before. So if they're saying that no one's ever reached this far down into the earth, I would imagine that Jules Verne would come up with something that lives up to that expectation. So no one's ever come to this part before. So it's kind of his realm of his own free creativity to kind of create this picture of the world that us as the readers are able to fully understand, right? Through images, through figurative language. I want to be able to fully understand what I'm reading, right? I want to almost be thinking like I'm watching a movie with how much details in this text, so that I'm seeing it, not only seeing it, I'm reading it, I'm understanding it. That's how I would feel would be the reasonable thing to come next, just by looking at his level of detail in comprehension and language choices, his level of creativity. I feel that in the story to come, there has to be some sort of element that really allows the reader to fully engulf in the story and fully be ready and on the edge of their seat to learn more what's coming next, right, on this journey. I personally have never read the story completely, but this makes me want to read the story more and see what happens to them. Do they find water? Do they get out? Do they stay in this? Do they discover this hidden world where they stay forever? What if they discover this hidden world? Are there animals? Are there other people? Like, there's all these things that could be taken as the reader. Okay, so let's go ahead and wrap up our activity there. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our weekly reflection. This is going to be your last weekly reflection of the year. This is really exciting. Good job, guys. This is our last weekly reflection of the year. So our weekly reflection this week is I want to encourage your creativity. You guys are going to be writing a 3-paragraph creative science fiction story. So this one, there's no guidelines. You just need to write a 3-paragraph creative story. Include as many characters as you want. It could be a single character story. It could be a 10-character story. Just has to be a minimum of 3 paragraphs. Again, remember, guys, you are in 6th grade. A paragraph needs to be 5 sentences long. If I need to go through and count each sentence, I will. But it needs to be 5 sentences long. I want you guys to write a creative science fiction story. So if you have any questions about the science fiction genre, again, you can always ask me or go back to Monday's lesson when we talk about the features of science fiction genre, where we did our bubble diagram. There's lots of different ways that you can see the details of it. Be creative with your science fiction story. Allow your story to include characters. Make sure a story member includes a beginning, middle, and end. Include some sort of lesson that needs to be learned. Anything that you want to do to make it as creative as possible. The only guidelines is it has to be in the science fiction genre. Okay? So the assignments that are going to be due this week on Friday are going to be the warm-ups and your weekly reflection, okay, for ELA. So those are the only ELA assignments that are going to be due this week, is your daily warm-ups and your weekly reflection. I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up right now for ELA, and we're going to go straight into our last social studies lesson. Good morning. Okay, guys, let's go ahead and jump into our final social studies lesson of this year for virtual lessons. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and get started. We're going to finish with page 3 of our newspaper for this week. Again, we're discussing Alexander the Great. I'm going to go ahead and read through the newspaper, and then we'll talk about our key points, okay? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start off on the top of the page, and this is continuing under the section, the Gordian Knot. So in 333 BCE, 23-year-old Alexander decided he would do his best to solve the puzzle. After about 2 hours, he took out his long sword and cut the knot open, revealing the hidden ends of the rope. Later that evening, a storm pounded the city of Gordium. The townspeople said it was a sign from Zeus. They said that Zeus was pleased with what Alexander had solved the puzzle of the Gordian knot. Something no one has ever been able to do. Did Alexander cheat? Did anyone say you had to untie the knot? What do you think? Going to the next section, a prophecy fulfilled. Remember oracles, the places people went to ask the gods for advice? Some say Alexander traveled to the oracle of Delphi and found the priestess wasn't taking questions that day. Alexander was angry and demanded that the priestess answer his questions. The priestess yelled, "My son, you are invincible." Alexander took this response as praise and departed to conquer Asia. In only 11 years, Alexander conquered all the lands from Egypt to India. But at the Indus River, Alexander's exhausted soldiers refused to go any further. Alexander was forced to give up and begin his long march back home. Alexander's reign ends. The empire of Alexander the Great soon unraveled after Alexander died. Alexander didn't have any sons, but on his deathbed that he wanted to leave his empire to the strongest. His generals started to argue amongst themselves as to who should rule. Eventually, the three strongest generals divided the empire into three parts. Alexander's legacy. A legacy is something that you leave behind after you die. It doesn't have to be an object. It can be things like knowledge or traditions. Alexander was an accomplished soldier. He conquered much of the known world and established one of the world's most powerful empires. However, Alexander's greatest legacy was his sharing of Greek culture. His love for culture caused him to share the customs, language, writing, literature, and the ideas of the Greeks with all he met. The world would have been a very different place today if it wouldn't have been for Alexander the Great. So I'm going to go on to the world region section at the very bottom, and then I'll pick up at the top, okay? So Macedonia. The country of Macedonia is on the southern part of Balkan Peninsula, because it doesn't touch any bodies of water. It is a landlocked country. The highest peak of Golem Korab, which stands at 9,396 feet. There is a snow peak and other mountains most of the year. The largest and most important river in Macedonia is the Vardar. The people of Macedonia also have created a number of artificial lakes, the largest being the Mavrovo. Whitewater kayaking is a favorite pastime of the country today. In 1929, Macedonia became part of the Balkan country Yugoslavia. In 1993, Macedonia broke from Yugoslavia to form the Republic of Macedonia. For a while, there was great tension and many deaths of the region as Yugoslavia tried to keep control of Macedonia and other breakaway regions. Today, Macedonia borders Serbia, Bulgaria, Albania, Kosovo, and Greece. There is a dispute with Greece over the name Macedonia because Greece's northern section has the same name. Also, many people of northern Greece have ties with the Republic of Macedonia, and the Greek government is worried that the Republic will try and take over the Greece area known as Macedonia. So I'm going to go ahead and go up to the top where it says World Biography, and it's going to talk about Aristotle. So I'm going to go ahead and read that section, and then we'll be finished reading the page 3. So Aristotle was born in 384 BCE in Stagiria, Macedonia. Aristotle's family believed education was important. His father was the king's physician. Aristotle would probably have become a doctor too if his father hadn't died when Aristotle was only 10 years old. Aristotle's mother also died while he was very young. When he was a teenager, Aristotle went to Athens and became a pupil of one of the best thinkers of all time, Plato. He stayed at Plato's academy for 20 years. Plato was so impressed with Aristotle's intelligence that he called him nous, meaning the mind. When Plato died, Aristotle didn't get the job as the lead teacher of the academy, so he left Athens. Eventually, Aristotle returned to Macedonia, where he tutored King Philip's son, Alexander. For 7 years, Aristotle worked with Alexander. He taught him ways about Greek culture, including the writing of Homer. Aristotle even copied by hand a special volume of Homer's Iliad for Alexander to study. Alexander later went back to Athens and opened his own school called the Lyceum. He became one of the most famous thinkers of ancient Greece. A philosopher, scientist, and teacher, Aristotle is often called the father of science. He was interested in anatomy, astronomy, geography, meteorology, zoology, and much more. There is even a crater on the moon named after him, the Aristoteles crater. Aristotle died in 322 BCE. Some great quotes from Aristotle. We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is a habit. We think in pictures. If you wish to change what you think, change the picture. Education is the best provision for the journey to old age. Happiness depends upon ourselves. So that's going to be the end of the text for this week's newspaper. Let's go ahead and fill in our 4 points for today, and then we'll call it a day. So the Gordian knot. Remember, this is when they, in the kingdom, the city of Gordium, where they had this ox cart and they had this famous crazy knot that was formed that was impossible to take apart, and it was known for, if you came to the city of Gordium, you waited in line to try and take apart this knot, and if you did, you were going to be the ruler of the world. And it was said that it was made to honor the god Zeus, and no one was able to figure out how to untie it. So I'm going to write the Gordian knot was a puzzle / knot in an ox cart. Ox cart to honor Zeus. And I'm going to say Alexander the Great solved the puzzle. But, like they were saying, solved. But, like they were saying in the text, they were saying that on that day, they said Zeus was pleased that Alexander had solved the puzzle, something no one else would be able to do. They were asking the question, did he cheat? How was he able to do it? Do they actually think he did it? Did he just cut it? Like, there's all these things that people today still don't know if he actually solved the Gordian knot. But again, this is just all legacies and stories that have been told for generations and generations to come about Alexander the Great and his reign, right? So next, a legacy is something you leave behind when you die. So Alexander the Great never had any children, right? So, or never had any sons. And in this time period, you could only leave your empire behind to a son, right? And Alexander the Great never had any sons. So when he was dying, they were going to say, where is his legacy going to follow, right? So he said he only wanted to leave it to the strongest, right? But he never said who. So his generals fought amongst each other and eventually divided the empire into 3 sections, and each general got to run a section. But it talks about how his empire soon collapsed, because without that structure, it was never going to be able to survive. And when we read in the first part of the newspaper, when it says when a civilization or an empire is fighting or is weakened, it's easier for them to be conquered. So, a landlocked country is a country surrounded by land on all sides. Right? It's surrounded by land on all sides, and it does not touch any bodies of water. Specifically, I'm going to underline water. Specifically in reference to Macedonia, right? Alexander the Great was from Macedonia. So, specifically referring to the country of Macedonia. It was a landlocked country, meaning it was surrounded on all sides by land. There was no access to water. You had to go through other countries to access water. In this specific case, Macedonia, if you were to go, so here's Macedonia. Let me draw a picture. So here's Macedonia right here. I'm just going to put an M. If it wants to get to water this way, it needs to go through Albania. And if it wants to go through water this way, it needs to go through Bulgaria. And if it wants to get to water this way, it needs to go through Greece, right? So it's surrounded on all sides. And Macedonia just happens to be where Alexander the Great was from, and which helped him get to his rise and power when he first became ruler of the country. So our last key vocab word comes from our world biography section at the top of the page. The Lyceum is going to be Aristotle, school, right? In Athens. So they talk about how Athens went to Plato's school, and Aristotle went to Plato's school in Athens as a child to learn, and he studied there for 20 years. When Plato died, he did not get the job of being the sole teacher, so in turn he left and returned back to Macedonia, where he was from. So Aristotle is also from Macedonia. He then became the tutor of King Philip, the king of Macedonia's son, which is Alexander the Great, which we know. So Aristotle became Alexander the Great's teacher, and he taught him all of the Greek culture that he learned. He taught him about literature, everything that led Alexander the Great to being the intellectual man that he was taught by Aristotle, right? Once Aristotle finished teaching Alexander the Great, when he became ruler, Aristotle then returned to Athens and formed his own school called the Lyceum, which is where he remained. Aristotle is also known as the father of science. He was really one of the greatest thinkers in our world. So let's go ahead and wrap things up there. For social studies this week, again, it's going to be the think and review questions and then the let's write, as well as the assessment, and you do have warm-ups this week for social studies. So I'm going to wrap up really quick. I'm going to say the 4 assignments that are going to be due this week, and then we'll go ahead and conclude there. And then this will be our last YouTube lesson. So this week on Friday, you will have to do your warm-ups for both ELA and social studies, your weekly reflection for ELA, your week 23 assessment for social studies, and your week 23 think and review / let's write. And that's going to be the last of the assignments. And then we'll go into our last 4-day week of school, and then it's going to be summer break. Again, I just want to thank you guys for the opportunity to allow me to be your teacher. I know it's within this uncertain time, unfortunately, but I do want to thank you for allowing me to be your teacher and really help to share what I have, my knowledge, what I have to teach you with in social studies and ELA. I know it kind of unfortunately ended with virtual lessons, but I enjoyed doing them. I loved being able to continue to touch base with you guys through these lessons as if we were still in the classroom. So again, I just want to thank you all for all of your hard work, and I will talk to you on the Zoom call for the last week, and then we will go straight into summer break.